Look up. That is what 7 million people in Israel did last night. And what they saw in the sky above them was something no missile defense engineer, no Pentagon strategist, no American general ever wanted the world to witness. Not one missile coming down. Hundreds. From a single launch. Iran has deployed cluster missiles in active combat. And if you do not yet understand what that means, you need to, because it does not simply change this war. It breaks the entire logical foundation that modern missile defense is built on. Once you understand how it works, you will understand why the most expensive defense systems in American history are suddenly facing a problem they were never designed to solve. Here is the science. Stay with it, because this is where it gets genuinely terrifying. A normal missile defense system works like this. Radar detects an incoming missile, tracks its path, calculates the trajectory, fires an interceptor to destroy it. One threat, one response. The entire system, billions of dollars, decades of engineering, thousands of hours of testing, was built around that equation. Governments have told their citizens for years, you are protected. The intercept rate is high enough. The system works. Iran just broke that equation in half. A cluster missile launches as a single projectile. Radar detects it. One target. The defense system calculates the intercept. The interceptor fires. And then, at a specific altitude, at the precise moment the defense system has committed its response, the missile opens. From that single casing, hundreds of individual warheads release simultaneously, spreading across a wide area, continuing toward the ground on independent trajectories. By the time the defense system processes what just happened, the intercept window is gone. The interceptor that fired hits the empty casing. The hundreds of submunitions are already falling. And to stop them now, you would need hundreds of interceptors launched in the same second, which no system on Earth is designed to do. What you are seeing in the videos, the ones that look like fireworks exploding across the Israeli sky, the bright trails spreading outward like an umbrella opening, that is not one missile being destroyed. That is one missile becoming hundreds. That is the moment the defense system realizes it is already lost. Iran has found a way to make a single missile function like an entire missile barrage, and the world watched it work in real time last night. But here is what makes this even more devastating, and this is the dimension that military briefings are working hard to contain. The cluster munition problem does not just overwhelm interceptors. It overwhelms the entire budget calculation that missile defense is built on. America's most advanced interceptor missiles cost between $3 million and $9 million each. A single Iranian cluster missile costs a fraction of that to produce. To reliably defend against one cluster launch, attempting to intercept individual submunitions as they separate and fall, you would need to fire dozens of interceptors in the same moment. That is $100 million to $300 million in defense spending to stop a single incoming cluster strike. Iran can launch dozens of these in a single night. And remember what was reported last week. America's interceptor stockpiles are already running low. Former Secretary of State Blinken said it publicly. The Pentagon has been leaking it privately. The supply is finite, and the production timeline to replace depleted stocks takes years, not months. Now add cluster missiles to that equation. Now you understand why people inside the Pentagon are not sleeping. But the military dimension, as catastrophic as it is not the biggest story breaking today. Iran struck a Microsoft data center in the Gulf, not an airstrip, not a weapons depot, not a command post, a data center. The physical infrastructure that runs cloud computing, financial systems, corporate networks, AI services, and digital communications for thousands of companies operating across the Middle East. The kind of facility that most people never think about and whose destruction they would feel immediately and everywhere in ways they could not easily trace back to a single missile strike in a Gulf city. This is Iran telling the world something very specific. The battlefield is no longer only physical. Every piece of American economic infrastructure in the region, every data center, every financial hub, every digital investment is now a legitimate target. And Iran is already talking about phase 2, cyber attacks on American infrastructure, power grids, water systems, financial networks inside the United States itself. Phase 1 is what the world has been watching. Missiles, drones, burning oil facilities, a retreating carrier group. Phase 2 has not started yet, but the Microsoft data center just announced it is coming. A Gulf billionaire publicly humiliated the President of the United States this week. Not a political opponent, not a foreign leader, a Gulf businessman, one of the UAE's most prominent developers and investors, a man who has spent his career building spectacular real estate, educational, and infrastructure projects across the region, sat down and wrote Donald Trump a letter that is being shared across the Arab world right now. The message was simple and devastating. Who gave you the right? Who gave you the right to bring a war into the most peaceful, prosperous region on Earth and burn it to the ground? Who gave you the right to destroy what took 4 decades to build? Who gave you the right to turn cities where people walked safely at 4 a.m. into cities where nobody can sleep? When billionaires write letters like that, when the people with the most invested in stability and the most to lose from conflict start publicly breaking with American policy, It means the calculation has already shifted at the level where it matters most. The public letter is the visible part. The investment withdrawals are the real part, and those withdrawals are now happening. This is the story that matters more than any single missile strike, more than any individual military development, more than all the dramatic footage of cluster munitions over Tel Aviv. Gulf sovereign wealth funds, which collectively represent trillions of dollars in assets built on decades of oil revenue, are formally reviewing their overseas investment commitments, specifically their commitments to the United States. The $5 trillion investment pipeline that Trump came to the Gulf to secure, the deals he announced with visible satisfaction as evidence of American economic dominance, is being reviewed. Possibly redirected, possibly withdrawn. Here is why that is the financial equivalent of a structural event for American economic power. The petrodollar system, the arrangement under which Gulf states sell oil in US dollars and reinvest those dollars into American assets, is the invisible foundation under everything Americans take for granted economically. It is why the US can borrow at relatively low interest rates despite carrying $33 trillion in debt. It is why the dollar remains the world's reserve currency, even though America has not balanced its budget in decades. It is why American consumers can buy imported goods at prices that would be impossible if the dollar were not so globally dominant. Remove Gulf investment from American markets, and you do not simply lose some foreign capital. You trigger a cascade. Interest rates on US debt rise because there is less demand for Treasury bonds. The dollar weakens. Inflation becomes harder to control. The Federal Reserve faces impossible simultaneous choices between fighting inflation and supporting growth. And here's what makes this moment different from every previous strain on the petrodollar system. The Gulf states are not just unhappy, they have an alternative. China has been building that alternative for 15 years. Alternative payment systems, yuan-denominated oil contracts, infrastructure investment relationships that do not come with F-16s and military base requirements attached. The Gulf switching its financial alignment from Washington to Beijing is no longer a theoretical possibility. It is a process that has already begun. This war is accelerating it dramatically. Now add the intelligence dimension. Because something is happening with Iranian strike accuracy in this conflict that the American military cannot fully explain. Precise hotel rooms in Bahrain where American officials were staying, specific buildings where intelligence personnel operated, the exact location of radar systems in Jordan. Targets that should have been protected by layers of operational security, classified location data, and intelligence compartmentalization being hit with precision that suggests someone knows exactly where those assets are. China's satellite constellation, which has expanded dramatically in the last 5 years, now provides real-time imaging capability over the entire Middle East at a resolution and frequency that rivals American intelligence systems. The suggestion being discussed in serious analytical circles is that Chinese satellite data is providing Iran with targeting intelligence that Iran could not generate independently. If that assessment is accurate, it changes the entire intelligence architecture of the conflict. America's historic advantage in the Middle East was never only its weapons, it was knowing more than everyone else, where everyone was, what everyone was doing, what was coming next. That informational dominance, if China has effectively neutralized it through satellite support to Iran, means America is fighting partially blind in addition to running out of interceptors and losing Gulf financial partnerships at the same time. The military, financial, and intelligence pillars of American regional power are being struck simultaneously. That is not a coincidence. That is a strategy, and it is working. 5 days ago, when this latest escalation began, most people assumed it would follow the pattern of every previous Middle East flare-up in living memory. Dramatic for a week, intense for 2, then a ceasefire brokered through back channels, a statement from Washington claiming success, and a slow return to whatever passes for normal. That is not what is happening. What is happening is the systematic dismantling of the architecture that has governed the Middle East for 40 years, not in a chaotic, uncontrolled collapse, deliberately, methodically, layer by layer, at a pace calibrated to keep the world slightly off balance and unable to mount a coherent response before the next layer falls. The military layer is degrading. America's missile defense credibility has been shattered publicly. Cluster missiles have exposed the fundamental vulnerability in the intercept model. Interceptor stockpiles are depleting faster than they can be replaced. A quarter of early warning radar capacity in the region is offline. The financial layer is fracturing. Gulf investment commitments to America are under formal review. The petrodollar recycling system is showing its first serious structural cracks. The billion-dollar commitment pipeline Trump announced is now in question. Sovereign wealth managers are having conversations they never expected to have. The intelligence layer is compromised. Targets that should have been secret are being hit with precision that points toward external targeting support. America's most durable regional advantage, not hardware superiority, but informational dominance, is under direct challenge for the first time. The digital layer is opening. The Microsoft data center strike is Iran announcing that Phase 2 targets economic and technological infrastructure, not just military installations. 4 layers, all degrading simultaneously, 5 days in. Here's the question that every government, every investor, and every ordinary person with money in the global financial system needs to sit with, honestly. What does America actually do from here? The options are genuinely constrained in ways they have not been in any previous American military engagement. Escalating conventionally means more of what is not working, more expensive interceptors chasing cheap drones, more bases getting hit, more Gulf relationships fracturing. The math gets worse every day, not better. Escalating to regime change in Iran, Trump's stated goal, requires ground forces in a country of 90 million people with deep military preparation, complex terrain, and 2 decades of experience specifically designing the kind of asymmetric resistance that destroyed American campaigns in Iraq and Afghanistan. Iran's military planners have been studying those campaigns and building countermeasures since 2003. A ground invasion of Iran would make Iraq look like a rehearsal. Using nuclear threats as leverage risks, triggering exactly the Dimona strike Iran has publicly promised, which crosses into territory where no one controls the escalation anymore, and every scenario model stops producing useful outputs. De-escalating and withdrawing means accepting the offer Iran made from the first day. American bases leave, strikes stop. This is politically humiliating. It is also the only option on the table that ends the military and financial bleeding without risking something worse. History already knows how leaders choose when the political cost of withdrawal feels larger than the human and economic cost of continuation. They continue, until continuation becomes impossible. Here is what impossible looks like on the current trajectory. The Gulf investment withdrawal hits American bond markets, raising borrowing costs at the exact moment military spending is spiking. The dollar weakens as petrodollar recycling slows. Inflation reignites from the oil supply shock just as it was finally cooling. The Federal Reserve is trapped between raising rates to fight inflation and accelerating economic contraction, or cutting rates to support growth and watching prices explode. Simultaneously, Iran moves to Phase 2, cyber attacks on American infrastructure whose vulnerabilities are real, documented, and have been a known weakness for years. And through all of it, China and Russia position themselves as the stability partners the region has been looking for. Signing energy deals, making investment commitments, offering security arrangements that do not come with carrier groups and cluster bomb footage and public announcements about who the next supreme leader will be. The world being built in the wreckage of this conflict does not have America at its center. That world was already being built slowly before this war started. This war just put it on fast forward. Last night, hundreds of cluster submunitions rained down from a single missile over Israel. This morning, Gulf billionaires are reviewing investment commitments to America. This afternoon, a Microsoft data center in the Gulf is offline. Tonight, somewhere in Tehran, planners are reviewing Phase 2. In Washington, in the building where the decisions that caused all of this were made, the people responsible are trying to work out how to explain to the American public that the 4-week war they were promised is now a multi-month war with no clear exit, no clear victory condition, and a financial cost that is going to land on every single person watching this in ways that are already unavoidable and will arrive whether or not anyone explains where they came from. They do not have a good answer. History never forgives the people who chose pride over peace when the price was paid by everyone else. Remember that. Share this with everyone you know right now. Iran deployed cluster missiles in active combat last night over Israel, one missile becoming hundreds of warheads simultaneously, defeating the interceptor model that missile defense is built on. Iran struck a Microsoft data center in the Gulf, announcing Phase 2 targets economic infrastructure. Gulf sovereign wealth funds are formally reviewing their U.S. investment commitments. The petrodollar system is showing structural cracks for the first time. Chinese satellite data may be providing Iran with targeting intelligence. 4 layers of American regional power, military, financial, intelligence, digital, are degrading simultaneously, 5 days in. And the 4-week war that was promised has no exit, no clear victory condition, and a cost that has already started arriving.